Good afternoon, I guess. It's afternoon, right? I'm Aaron Long. I'm one of the student representatives to the board, and this is the first chance we've had to welcome you. This is my colleague, Sam Dvorakova. Thank you for coming to iSocial. A lot of what happens for students at the conference is a direct result of our regular membership's engagement with them, and not just at the conference, in scholarship that happens throughout the year, in efforts aimed at helping find student funding from your home institutions to bring them to iSocial. I'm in iSocial because a mentor of mine once found the money to make sure I could come and be at iSocial. So thank you for all you do for students, and why don't we give you a round of applause for that. In the spirit of welcome, just a couple of things. First, we had a board change this year, and Rosalind Verwood, who's done a magnificent job, and you heard her scholarship quoted by Gary Poole in last night's plenary, rotated off the board. Rosalind, are you here? Okay, I don't see her, but Rosalind's around the conference, so if you see her, thank her for her years of service. She served on the board for 4 years, and they were 4 really productive, really progressive years. So thanks to Rosalind. And welcome Sam, who just joined the board this year in our last election cycle. And I'm looking forward to where the student representation on the board goes as Sam becomes an active member of the board this year. Our last welcome is to our plenary speakers, and I assured them that you are a welcoming audience, and that's not to put pressure on you. That's a vote of confidence, but this has been a fantastic conference to present at for me in the last 6 years, and these are some of my favorite people to see at conferences anywhere. This is my favorite conference to go to, including those in my discipline. So without further ado, I'll turn the introductions of our plenary speakers over to Sam.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm way too short for this. Sorry. So coming to speak to us on navigating their experiences of transforming from their past professional identities to scholarly identities through self-study methodology are 3 scholars from Kent State University, joined in spirit and later video by their 4th colleague. So first off, we have Rachel Foote, the absentee colleague, who is a PhD candidate in curriculum and instruction, here in person, who asked to be introduced through jazz hands. So Chad Everett Allen. I don't think I know how to do this actually, so sorry. He is completing his dissertation in curriculum and instruction and has had a successful career teaching of over 20 years. Next up, we have Karen Andres Tollefield, who is a retired school teacher of over 30 years of experience and has recently received her PhD in curriculum and instruction. And concluding this lovely roster is Professor Alicia Grove, who is a professor of social studies education and teacher education at Kent State University, and she quite literally wrote the book on self-study methodology. So please join me in welcoming this amazing panel.
Hello, welcome. We are very, very excited to be here. I want to thank Nancy. If it wasn't for Nancy, we wouldn't be here. She's been very encouraging in this work for many years now, and so we wanted to say thank you and congratulations now on your award. Well deserved. I do want to share something just quickly. This is the first time I've spoken since I have gotten my voice back after 2 years. So if anyone's a speech pathologist, just so you know, I'm going to follow my clinician's advice. So I have very strict orders on things to do so that I sound normal. But we're very excited. So we are here to talk a little bit about changes, which is the article.
Changes. Turn and face the strange changes.
A little bit. Little shout out. It seems like ages ago when we started this project, which it was, especially compared to where everyone is now. I didn't update Sam, so I'm sorry. Rachel has finished her PhD, so she does have her doctorate now. So there's, we've all come a long ways. I'm actually now also associate dean, along with full professor. How that happened, who knows? But while we are here with you today, we are hoping to weave a tale of the inquiry process that happened with this group and the stories that how it influenced us. I didn't want to begin today because I've always been the role of the guide and facilitator, not the leader. I might be the professor, but I'm not in charge. But they said I had to, because I got them into this mess, so I had to start it all out. They also thought it'd be good because I could give you a little scaffolding and preface for their conversation. So, once upon a time, I taught a course about practitioner inquiry, and Rachel, who is here with us in spirit recording and because of visa issues not here with us, had an amazing idea. Rachel's brilliant, and during the course, one of the things that she brought up is her passion is about identity development, especially doctoral student identity and learning. I tried to nurture that and suggested that perhaps a self-study might be the way to go. She agreed. I say that as if she just was like, yes, but she did agree. Yes, that's a good idea, because she had to. She's a student, right? And she did begin to consider what it would look like. I promised whatever she decided I'd guide, and I waited. And to be clear in this, I was never to be in on this. So I, in self-study collaboratives, often am the lead or I'm with my students, and the same with SOTL work, I would study student learning. This was never about this. It was about me supporting her, studying her learning. And that's the sort of shift and change that's a little different. And I think why Nancy really likes what we did and have been pushing here. So I turn around in a flash, an homage to their alma mater. We're golden flashes. All of a sudden she had a team, Chad and Karen. And she's like, can I do it with others? I'm like, well, yeah, of course. And this actually is key to the work of self-study. And it's often, because it's so hard to push your own interpretations, your own experiences. And as peers, they would do a far better job than I. Rachel and I, and actually Karen and Chad, had a very good relationship, but I still was the advisor. Like, there's no way I could push them in the way they could push each other. And so it began. I sent my dear Padawan, Rachel, and her friends off to explore their learning, and I, the expert in methodology, was there to support. At the heart of the work was a love of learning, and that's what I wanted to just focus a little bit about, was that I was the methodological guide and support, but did not engage in the study myself. I was there when they asked questions. Can we collect data this way? Yes, that'd be awesome. How do we analyze this? Why don't you think about it this way? I was there for reassurance. Yes, you're doing fine. Keep at it. Just keep asking that. Keep doing it. It's fine. Don't worry. I was there to challenge. Have you thought about this? At this point, I decided, though, that in the talk, I feel a little backstory about me is necessary, so you know how we got to the point that we had a practitioner inquiry class? Because I don't know about you, but having a course in a doctoral program on practitioner inquiry isn't really common. At least in the US, I think of a few I can think of, very few. So it began when I started at Kent State, like 17 years ago. We were evaluated for a tenure and promotion using the Boyer model. I was ecstatic. I was like, yes, I can do my work. I can be evaluated in different ways. It's going to be great. I found the perfect place because self-study, at least for me, fit into both scholarship of teaching and scholarship of discovery. Perhaps I was a tad naive. It wasn't quite like that. They hadn't all embraced the Boyer model. Obviously now, grown up, I realize that, but at the time I didn't know. So my work started out actually focusing very heavily on student learning, because they were like, oh, that's research. But the self-study part sort of stayed hidden, though I still did it. I realize now, looking back, that my passion was already there. My first student teaching seminar that first year, we had action research built into the course. I was like, great, this is perfect. It fits everything, and as soon as students started talking about questions that sounded like self-study, I just geared them that way. Because as a new teacher, so I'm a teacher educator, as a new teacher, they often needed to explore their own beliefs, thinking, perspectives, their own learning and processes to become a great teacher. They didn't need to study their students yet because they weren't there. So for those who were ready, I guided them to self-study. They didn't know it. We didn't call it that. That was too much. I was not going there. Plus, I was first year, so I'm not going to rock the boat too much. And I began doing my own self-studies, trying to merge my worlds. As I grew, so did my ability to do that. I began to, what one of my former doctoral students dubbed spread the love of self-study. And one of those ways was with a colleague. I began a collaborative of doctoral master's students in which we all engaged in self-study or action research of our own teaching or ourselves as teachers or teacher educators. I know, a little complex. So it was a big old mess, but it was awesome. It was everything about messiness that you can imagine, but we learned so much. Teaching, learning about ourselves, everything. I now see this, looking back, as my first formal step towards using self-study as a genre of research within SOTL. So I wanted to give a little bit on self-study, because I had looked around and I was like, I don't see anyone I know from my self-study world. So, and I had kind of figured that. So, self-study is this is going to be the quick and dirty version because I could spend days on this. Self-study is a focus on the study of self as practitioner in myriad ways. It came out of teacher ed. So about the same time that y'all started, we started. I feel like last night listening to Gary speak, I felt like I was in sort of a parallel universe, and I was like, oh my. Like, this is all the stuff we have been arguing and discussing and debating in a very positive way. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I've got a new home, a second new home. So self-study started over 20 years ago. I joined in 1998, again, telling how long I've been at this. And I was strongly housed there for a long time, but I began to move outside of the walls of self-study and teacher education. Because I started seeing this as something that others could use. And I didn't just teach teachers. Karen wasn't a teacher anymore. I had nurses I was teaching. I was teaching counselors. I was teaching speech pathology. I mean, we have a doctoral program that lots of folks are in. And I started to realize that this was something they could all use, either to teach as a practitioner, as a teacher in a university, but even as a counselor themselves. So and this is how Rachel, this is where we get up to Rachel, poor Rachel. She was like, we're all slammed together. She's such a good sport. So a little background for those not familiar with self-study. Self-study is a disciplined, systematic form of inquiry. Imagine that. In many ways like any other form that you've encountered. However, this one particularly focuses on examining your own beliefs, practices, identity, and experiences, sort of in just ... as a practitioner. In the case in front of you today will be our doctoral students who are searching for their own understanding of themselves and their practice as learners. Vicki Lebowski, so I have to get the shout out to the right person, she summarized essential features of the core self-study that is self-focused and self-initiated. But the knowledge created applies out. It's not just about what you learn. Self-study is an improvement aim, but it's not necessarily action-oriented immediately. So it's improvement aim, but not necessarily a quick answer. Although self-study has self in it, it's always collaborative, almost always. It's kind of a oxymoron. It's self-study, but we do it together. It's rich, robust, qualitative methods, and sometimes quantitative, whatever fits. What's your question? How does it work? And if you go in this way, be prepared. It's iterative and recursive. It doesn't really stop. It just keeps going. And in so ways, self-study and SOTL align. SOTL and self-study are forms of inquiry into the world of teaching. A little bit, they came from different places, but very similar. They both have a broader, they're very context-rich, context-dependent. One of the things I love about both, or at least in my mind, is that they disturb and disrupt the knower-known, researcher-research dichotomies. And that's what I love about it. One of the things. They both strive for methodological soundness. They both focus on students, and I would argue that both need to continue to move to bring students in to the work stronger. Not just as in studying more students, but bringing them in like this. So self-study was the form of inquiry that my colleagues began to engage in, and now to the important part. Rachel, Karen, and Chad's experience. To preface a little bit, there'll be a reflective question sort of after each section, just to take a moment to look at, but we're going to come to those at the end for discussion. So just so you have a little time. But I'm going to introduce Rachel now. So this is, see, I even messed up my own presentation part. Good thing Rachel's not here to like yell at me. So think about how can SOTL reach new heights by encouraging students to take the lead in the research? And what role would you take? So take that moment to think. We're going to come back to it so that you can talk at your tables, but just get that started because that's where Rachel wants to start.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, I'm sorry that I can't be there with you today. However, I think my absence lends itself to a wonderful opportunity for continued dialogue and discussion using Voicethread. If you haven't used Voicethread before, it's an excellent interactive tool that instructors and students can use to asynchronously communicate and collaborate with each other. As well as using it for the platform for me speaking to you today, we've loaded all of the PowerPoint slides into this Voicethread and we'll give you all the link to the thread at the end of the session. We hope over the coming days and weeks as you reflect on this conference, and particularly reaching new heights in terms of students taking the primary role in the scholarship of teaching and learning, that you'll visit this Voicethread and leave your thoughts and reflections. One of our team will be checking the Voicethread regularly, and we really look forward to talking with you more about our and your experiences. So, as Alicia mentioned, I attended a class on practitioner inquiry that Alicia taught in 2014. I had been an instructor of adults, but I had no experience in K-12 school environments. And my focus was on the higher education experience for adults and doctoral students. What I came to realize immediately in that class, as Alicia began to talk about the foundations and practices of self-study and practitioner inquiry, was that I, as a doctoral student, taking classes full-time, was in fact a practitioner. I was a practicing student who could find as much value as instructors in reflecting on and analysing my own practices as a learner. This tapped strongly into research I had been reading on the importance of identity development in doctoral student success, considering the difficulties students often encounter as they transition from a learner used to the banking model of teaching in early experiences of formal education to an active agent in my own scholarly experiences and learning. At the time of Alicia's class, I was unaware of the wonderful world of SOTL. But now, as I look back, I see the many connections between self-study and SOTL. And when reviewing a self-study experience through that lens, I can see that in many ways we've reached new heights with us as the students taking the lead in our own scholarship on teaching and learning. As Peter Felton notes in his article on the principles of good practice in SOTL, SOTL tends to be instigated by faculty who see an issue, problem, or interesting outcome in their classroom or related to their teaching that they want to investigate further. However, our self-study essentially became an inquiry into student learning, our own student learning, prompted by our own experiences and interest in our learning. The experience was extremely beneficial to our work as scholars and our development as learners, as Karen and Chad will discuss further later. And I believe it could be a useful framework for learners at various stages of independence and development with just a few minor adjustments. I would now like to briefly look at the 5 principles of good practice in the scholarship of teaching and learning and draw them back to our study and some of the experiences we had as SOTL practitioners. Felton states that there are 5 elements needed for good practice in the scholarship of teaching and learning, and you can see them listed here in this table. Our self-study was related to student learning, though in a much broader context than children learning in a single classroom or setting. Felton explains that learning can be much more than just learning knowledge or skills. It can include the cultivation, quote, of attitudes or habits that connect to learning, end quote. Our guiding research question was, how do our daily experiences and practices as doctoral students influence our identity as doctoral students and emerging scholars? Essentially then, we were exploring how our daily lives and activities as students, to use Felton's phrase, cultivated the appropriate attitudes and habits to be successful doctoral students and scholars. The second, third, and fourth elements of good practice in SOTL interact and build with each other in our experience. The second branch of SOTL is that the study should be grounded in a local and broader context, while the third says that the study should be methodologically sound. The methodological framework of our study, self-study, provided an important structure that encouraged us to undertake a more systematic, rigorous, and critical approach to reflecting upon our learning. In the early part of the study, we had to complete a literature review to ensure the reasoning and purpose for the study was supported by literature and not just our own experiences. This in turn ensured that we were paying attention to the broader theoretical context of doctoral student identity development and self-study research. In terms of the local context, the doctoral environment was the initial driver for taking the lead in the study, with Alicia acting as a guide and handholder. And that leads us really to the fourth tenet of SOTL good practices, partnering with students. Felton explains that Hutchins and Huber have even gone as far as to call for a shared co-inquiry between students and instructors in SOTL. But in our case, we were definitely the primary investigators. Alicia, as a methodological expert and someone well-versed in examining her own practice, was an invaluable resource. But the investigation into ourselves was conceived of, undertaken, and disseminated by us. And while this was particularly relevant to our doctoral level context, as you will hear from Karen and Chad in a moment, we believe that encouraging students to take ownership of examining their own learning can yield transformative results at all levels. It's also important to note that we did not conduct this research on ourselves in isolation. There was individual reflection as we each collected data on ourselves, but as Karen will talk more about in a moment, we really began to see the transformative nature of our undertaking when we worked in partnership with each other. Once the collaboration began, we soon developed into a more deep group reflection and critical friendship that would forever alter our work as scholars. Finally then, good practice in SOTL requires going public in some way. As Chad will discuss in more depth, this is sometimes easier said than done. When you're publishing on your deep-seated reflections and insecurities as doctoral students, you are opening yourself up in a rather unique way. However, publishing the article and talking with you here today were necessary parts of the process to ensure that the activity we undertook was authentic, both to our local context and to the self-study methodology, and indeed to the SOTL framework. I'm going to hand over now to Karen, who will discuss how the methodological framework allowed her space to give voice to her experiences and helped her grow and learn as a doctoral student. Karen also talks in more detail about the importance of the collegial partnership the three of us had together and highlights some ways this could be adapted for students of all levels. Karen will then hand over to Chad, who highlights the freedom he found in the inquiry, but also the consequences of being so public with one's own practice when, in our context, we were all striving to break into a competitive, and some might say judgmental field of academia. Before we move on to Karen though, I'd like you all just to take a moment just to reflect on the following question. In what ways can we redevelop our formal curriculum to provide a framework for student-led scholarship of teaching and learning and encourage students to see themselves as active practitioners in scholarship? Thank you.
There's the question. Ready?
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Talifield, and thank you so much for inviting us to be with you today to share our work. We were very excited to be able to do this, and I know Rachel is just, we've been texting all morning, she just wished that she could be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my part of this journey, and being honest with yourself can be difficult, but it's so important on a journey of self-discovery. My story involves my experiences as a student, looking inward in a new way, and sharing that with student partners in a comfortable environment. The structure of the self-study was what helped me grow as a doctoral student and as a person, and that's going to be a theme throughout our whole presentation, is about the methodology that we used and how it helped us to grow. I have always been a learner, interested in seeking knowledge in many areas. Even as a teacher, I considered myself still a learner. So it made sense to me to pursue a PhD after retiring from a 30-year public school teaching career. A lot of people thought I was crazy. But what did surprise me was the identity crisis I experienced during this journey. The real shift came when I retired and became a graduate assistant and a full-time student. Not only did I experience a bit of an identity crisis, who was I now? Teacher or student? But moving from teacher to student at the same time as trying to transition to scholar researcher led me to begin doubting my motives and abilities in this unfamiliar world. It was like being thrown into the deep end of the pool unprepared. I was beginning to realize it was a different world from what I had experienced in my previous academic pursuits, and I felt insecurities that I had never felt before. I wasn't sure what was happening and never really examined the feeling closely, as these feelings were difficult to talk about with others because I didn't want anyone to think I didn't belong. It is actually a bit intimidating discussing these feelings here today. When Rachel asked me to join her in the self-study project, we had been friends and colleagues for a few years, and I had met Chad a few months prior and thought he would be a perfect fit, and so we began. As was suggested by the self-study methodology, we kept reflective journals and met regularly to discuss our feelings and engage in dialogue about our experiences. As I first stated, being honest with yourself can be difficult, but expressing feelings of insecurity aloud to others can be frightening. For this project to have any value, I realized I had to be honest, and I opened up about my feelings. Immediately, I saw relief in the faces of both Rachel and Chad, who acknowledged that they felt the same way. This discovery gave us confidence to talk with other doc students who confided that they too experienced these feelings, and we all realized that our feelings of imposter syndrome were not uncommon. And as you can see, we are in good company. When students at any level of education realize that they are not alone in their feelings and insecurities, it can become a powerful learning experience. The methodological framework we adopted allowed us to open up and be able to honestly assess our own experiences and feelings and help one another do the same. I doubt I would have been ever able to voice these feelings without examining myself as a learner during this study. This collegial partnership we developed was essential to me for successfully navigating the rest of my journey. Critical friends provide honest feedback while also encouraging and supporting one another. They're not critics. I only wish I had had this opportunity earlier, since we undertook this study during my second to last semester of coursework. That meant that I went through most of my coursework phase without this benefit. This project has led me to believe that students at all levels benefit from elements found in our self-study. If you're thinking about trying this type of self-study with your students, where students will take the lead, examining their learning with other students to reflect on their experience, motivations, and goals as learners, there are some important things to consider. First would be how to encourage and develop collaboration between students or a partnership between instructors and students. It is essential to build a level of trust with this approach, so it would make the most sense to plan time for students to get to know one another and form reflective research groups authentically before beginning the inquiry in earnest. I would never have been able to open up as I did had I not had some familiarity with Rachel and Chad before the study. It is also important to provide structure for these groups to follow. We use the structure of data collection found in self-study inquiry. For other groups, it may be enough to provide a structure where students are given the freedom to choose their own forms of reflection, but are provided with reflective questions that start more general and then build up to more deeper reflection over time. It is also important to designate specific time for students to meet regularly in class, where you know the conversation will mostly stay on track and you can help facilitate the discussions. Providing an authentic avenue for going public will depend on the level of education, but more importantly, the defined goals of the students. As Alicia discussed, the instructor here is a guide, but the goals of the inquiry should be determined by the students. Going public will depend on the level of study development. It could mean presenting to another school or group, designing a public voice thread for others to view, publishing an article in a journal, or even local school publications, or writing a letter to the upcoming class on the learning experience they encountered. The possibilities for going public are endless, but should always be driven by the students and their goals, so that the students take primary responsibility for the study as we did. I've tried to highlight here that with some structure, students can begin to undertake the sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately rewarding task of examining their own practice as learners. Before we move on to Chad's story, I'd encourage you to take a moment to reflect on this next question. What value is created when students are allowed to explore their learner, practitioner, and scholarly identities within a sound methodological process? Try saying that word when you have a dry mouth.
Good afternoon. My name is Chad Everett Allen. I'm very pleased to be here. Also, I want to thank Nancy. I made a note also to thank you for the support, the excitement, the encouragement of our work. I thought I was originally on a vacation to Canada. I was unaware I would actually have to come and present to 600 people from 24 countries, but I'm excited and glad to do so. I'd like to begin also with Sam. My retinas are being burned out. There you are. I want to thank you for the jazz hands. Help relax me. I appreciate that, and Aaron as well for the introduction. The first image I'm going to go into, my figuring out where I was in the doctoral study. I was a teacher for years. I give you this image of negative space, not negative space in the sense of something daunting or troublesome or fearful, but actually thinking of it as an artistic space. I didn't know where I fit in. I had been a teacher, actually a Spanish teacher for 15 years, a supervisor, a department chair, a coach, a tennis coach, 11 years at a private Catholic high school, 3 years in a public school, and I've been at Kent State for 6 years and Temple University in Philadelphia, where I'm currently in the College of Education. I had to figure out this identity of space. That's what I needed to do. I felt isolated as a doctoral student. I wasn't a GA, I was not a TA, I was working part-time, and there were all these questions I had, am I good enough? And can I complete this program? But there was also an energy around me that I needed to be publishing. there was all this question of like, have you published yet? This very intimidating question, and I may have lied a few times or made a comment that Facebook's a publication. But I had done a few book chapters and a few other things and presentations, largely for language instruction and second language acquisition. So going through this process of seeing myself as a doctoral student was hard to not see myself as a teacher. And many of you may relate to that. I also felt the isolation of in high school being a department chair, communicating with my faculty about how to assess, what's authentic assessment, how long should you do grammar instruction as opposed to engaging students in speaking, and a multitude of different aspects of teaching. However, I didn't realize I would show up to my office on campus and no one wanted to have these conversations with me. And I thought, oh God, I'm struggling with being a doctoral student teacher. This is a true struggle. So I'd like to point out in this image, some of you may see a white circle, some of you may see a black dot, some of you may see a tunnel. There are things that you see, so it's important to understand everyone's experience and what they're coming into a place, into a position, has experienced in another place. So the unknown. So focus on academic and personal context, where learning and exploring are respected and encouraged, became a value. This became a value, the only way I'm going to make it through this program. And I will share with you, my husband's a PhD and works at a major university. So the idea of having another PhD saying, oh, it's easy. I did it, you can do it. Many of you probably can think of this as also the drive that you had. But when you close that door in your office and you're like, I don't know if I really can. I don't know. I've got to find value in this process. The other idea I want to point out, if I can work this, there we go, is I needed a place to avoid this isolation and feeling of isolation, which I'm now teaching undergrad students in the College of Education. And I see they're so young. I need to get them encouraged to learn, to stay in school, to think of a master's, to think of expanding beyond. But I was in desperate need to find this place to encourage, engage, and involve, which essentially when that happens, I heard Gary Poole speak about this yesterday, finding a place of belonging that really stuck out to me yesterday. So that removes isolation, and I was looking for this space as well. So within our actual study, I began to feel this involvement, feel this, I'm not just a doctoral student, I have a place in this program. Last point is ontological and epistemological journey. It took me a while to get that second word. Focused on student learning. I still think this is important. If you don't know who you are and who you can be, it affects how you learn, how you appreciate knowledge, how you let others know that you know who they are and who they will be. But what is the value to learners in the learning experience? I'm glad I spoke with Nancy yesterday when we arrived and we were checking in, and she mentioned lots of students are now collaborating in this type of research and seeing a need to find that place, find that safe academic, scholarly place, but also accept their role within that place. So it was really nice to hear that the presentations, poster presentations, and publications are really promoting this collaboration, which to me, I thought it was too good to do it actually when we started our project because it showed weakness. It showed I was going to make a mistake. I couldn't be as perfect as I thought I could academically. So this was an important, to find the value for me. Next, encouraging scholar. This goes to value. I will focus largely on value and then public sharing. Encouraging scholarly engagement and inquiry as a partnership, not as a curricular experience. As a doctoral student, and this was actually my first research I ever engaged in that was published to this level with this much involvement from others. But to see it as a partnership, often in our syllabus, as I do as well, we ask students to do research. It's a requirement, do a research paper, do a basic research. But there's no real guide into thinking of it as a partnership, as a learning experience. So it feels very sterile to me, very overly academic instead of engaging, involving, and encouraging, which is what I was searching for. The next point is freedom of research, exploration, and process. I don't know about my colleagues, but I do have an idea that ultimately the product is publication, presentations, letting people know what you did. But for me, the process of doing our study was the most valuable. To gather and figure out what methodologies are we going to do? How do we analyze this? Can my journaling be art? Can I discuss my images? Can I approach it that way? That process is what ended up in the product that it did. Had I been told we should use this way to do it, should we use that way to do it, and why so-and-so wrote about it and everyone does this way, to me was a nice battle, an inner battle to say, well, let's break the norm. Let's figure out a better way to do this. Maybe not a better way, a different way. Let's create data. Let's not just collect data. There were a lot of things, that these questions actually led me to think about that probably would have never happened before. So the process here is more valuable in some sense than that final product. Also, valuable research leads to creating value of self. Being able to see yourself in a different light. It was scary for me to honestly admit with my colleagues working and publishing early on that this may be published. How honest and how revealing can and should I be? That was a difficult process. I understand this now as I'm going through dissertation and finding research participants and getting them to trust, because I do phenomenology. And phenomenology really requires a trust connection that is so valuable to find those participants that are willing to give everything to you. And now here I am doing it. So it was a real change and shift in how I think about my research, but also that the research must be transformative. I should not enter as a doctoral student with this research and leave the same doctoral student. It should not happen. Next, public sharing and tricentennial reflection. This is a word I made up, so if you go, I don't know this word, you don't know this word. I'm working on it right now. I have a publication out that also is using this term. But tricentennial reflection and public sharing was the scariest part of this for me. So when I got the news, the notification that we would be published, I was like, oh gosh, I better reread the article. I better check what I said. Still that fear of full reveal and honesty. And it wasn't until recently I read it and realized, oh my gosh, I only came out to family. Sorry. Good tears. Good tears. Sorry. I came out in 2006, and I lost no one in my life. Not a soul. Thank you. And that is a long life to live. And know that your work is going to be powerful. That someone reads it and says, yeah, this is a great article. God, I'm a mess. I'm proud. It's the cold. But I realized at that moment, the process, the publication, the whole thing is so valuable. And to go public as a gay male and to have to leave a teaching job because I was that gay male, and now it's in a journal, it was a profound, powerful moment. So thank you, Nancy, and thank you, everyone. It was an amazing process for me. But tricentennial reflection means don't forget that pain, don't forget that experience. Don't forget your past, your present, your future, because your future is going to be more meaningful when you reflect. And don't leave those areas of reflection. They will always mean something, whether you're published or not. That you share those experiences and that you communicate with your learning collaborative groups on campus, and that you think of research as a full reveal of what research and learning can be, not what it should be. I'd like to close with what we found in the value, obviously the tears tell you what my value of the process was. I told them I wasn't going to get upset, but even looking over notes today, I was like quivering. I was like, yeah, I just need some water, I'll be all right. That doesn't work. All right, but the value of the process for us, it should be no surprise. was fear and isolation is how to get rid of this, and why we see self-study especially so aligned with Shoutout. Fear and isolation keep a lot of people from actually engaging truthfully in research. The fear of, like we noticed, and those of you who haven't read our article, we really, all three of us identified in fear in different ways. And also isolation. I was probably the most gregarious, fun-loving teacher in the world. My university students would have said that, as well as my high school students, because I believed I was a teacher, but I was learning every day just like my students. And I was a supervisor for 6 years for student teachers, and tried to really make that connection with them. You are not in there to just tell them what they need to learn and guide them to that learning. You are learning every day with them. So for me, isolation I struggled with heavily. And then I realized that in our research that I'm no longer isolated. I'm engaged with this other group of doctoral students that have similar feelings and fears and excitements and triumphs and moments of doubt, and how important that was for me to reach this point. I haven't defended yet, but I'm going to. And it's to get rid of that, I am going to get rid of that fear and isolation. And it was difficult, but through this process of research, and I keep saying process, but that starts from the moment someone asks you to engage, and then that facilitator or professor says, you should engage and get out of it the most you possibly can, and find your own value in that process. I don't know if I would have done that if I had not had Dr. Crow actually say those exact words, and not to say, oh, I'll help you, but I'll guide you, I'll push you, I'll let you figure it out. I didn't want it neat. She mentioned messy earlier, and it was messy. It was very messy. But the final product was really, really understanding research, and as learners, finding our role in that learning process and that learning experience. Those of you who know the phenomenology, I always bring it back to experience, because my life has been about phenomenology. It has really been about how the experiences make meaning in my academic life. All right, I will move on to the last slide, or reflection. How would you practice change if you engaged your students in their own self-study collaboratives? And closing with this, as you think about this, I was jotting down so many things that I heard yesterday. A few colleagues stopped me. I should not have worn this in the hotel arts, and said, "Oh, what were you speaking about?" And what is it about in general? And it's the first time that I've ever had to explain what self-study meant outside of an academic scholarly wording. And the biggest word I could think of was probably empowerment. Empowerment as a learner, as a teacher, as a husband, as a friend, as a colleague, as a potential PhD. There's just so much that self-study actually brought for me. So I don't think of it necessarily as only a method, but as an experience of figuring out where you fit in learning process. All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We want to get quickly to some conversation, but we wanted to share a few things quickly as you think about this. So we have two perspectives. So from my perspective as the facilitator, how might I empower my colleagues to do this? Listen to what your students are saying and start where they are. So this is what I did with Rachel, and so it's pretty easy, but I'm gonna go fast because of watching time. Plant seeds of possibilities everywhere. So as you hear things, as you're listening, drop a little hint. So, when you think about that, that could be a study. Like, that question's really interesting. Have you thought about looking at that some more? You can plant seeds as you go along in the project about methodology. One of them, and I'm a question asker, so it's not like, hey, you do this, as you heard from Chad. It's, you do a lot of art. Have you thought about it? Would that art tell you something about your identity? So I plant seeds. I drop little hints, and if they take them, they take them. If they don't, they don't. But that's part of the process, for me at least. Also, I introduce more methods as they get further along. So, like just going along, you drop a little bit more, a little heavier. You introduce. Chad didn't know phenomenology when this started. Now he does. So sorry. But the idea is also to encourage students to grow by exploring different forms of data collection. So just always pushing a little bit, like support and challenge, in terms of like a Chickering thing, support and challenge. But in this place, dropping those hints. Support them when they get discouraged. This is like a constant, but like always, because of the confidence. Oh, I don't know if I can really do this. Well, yes, you can. Come on, you're doing well. Keep at it, keep going. Guide and challenge them to go public. Find the right places. They had no idea about SOTL or this journal, and honestly, I'm not sure the first issue had even come out when I was like, Rachel, I'm like, there's this journal. I think it'd be a good place for the study. So the sort of guide and challenge them to go public. And she was like, oh, really? I'm like, yes, really, it'd be great. I'm like, trust me. Like, they're perfect. It's perfect for what you guys did. She's like, no. I'm like, yeah, trust me. And then, of course, Nancy is like, oh, this is great. So a little bit from their perspective as well. Real quick, just a few, and don't expound, because we don't.
Just really quick. From the learner's perspective, we thought we could give just a little advice to facilitators from our view. So just to allow a self-study research group to form naturally whenever possible, or match newer doctoral students, newcomers with more experienced old-timer students. Encourage students to explore different forms of data generation, just like Chad and Alicia both mentioned, whether you write, whether you do some art, whether you do music, whatever works for you, we would encourage that. And provide space for learners to uncover a method of reflection that is best for them.
And the other number 4, have students complete regular critical incident reports, things that were most important to them, experiences, moments of anything that was related to actually the context. 5th is plan regular meetings into your curriculum to discuss progress, share reflections, and we've mentioned this numerous times, but if you just meet when you feel it at the time, then you miss a lot of data, you miss a lot of conversations. But if you actually say, let's meet next Thursday, you've got a set date. Work to publish and disseminate the results of the study. The last line, the benefit to identity development is lost if you don't plan for that final end, whether it's going to be publication or presentation or so forth. That was important also, although this came very quickly to us when we put everything together. So that was an important part of understanding that there is a final product through our process.
This is just our final. Our hope for future SOTL endeavors is that students become co-inquirers, them coming together. They're the puzzle pieces to build a sense of belonging within the learning experience. So some time to talk. We had our 4 questions, but I'm very aware of time. And so I was wondering if we wanted to just go to questions from the audience. Is that okay? I'm looking to Nancy. I'm like, what do you want to do? Questions or?
Well, does anybody want to talk? I mean, is there anything people want to say about those things?
Well, we'll start with these. Are there any questions you have about these questions? And then we'll go to just broad open questions. These are the 4 that we said throughout the time.
I will add that I was asked largely when the article came out for clarification of methods. People were very excited about a few emails about the actual process of figuring those methods out. But if you have any questions too, that if you don't have them now and you see us around, we're more than willing to answer those questions for you. But if anyone has any questions. None at all? Okay, perfect.
No, don't be like that.
Yeah, you have one, yes.
Yes. Loudly. Yeah. Be louder. Come.
Okay.
I think this is an extremely powerful tool with doctoral students. I can see the impact that it had. What would it look like to bring it down to undergraduate students?
It's pretty, I actually have an article about that. A colleague of mine, because I was supporting one of my other doc students to encourage him to help his students who were undergrads do self-study research, and it actually looks very similar, only we usually don't scare them off as much with the heavy-duty methods. Like, we provide a little more hand-holding with that. Like, I don't necessarily do a whole thing like on like the philosophical groundings of a field, things like that, because one, it's a short course. They're also student teaching, things of that nature. So we try to do it without all of the, that sounds awful, with all the extra pieces and layers, but it's, again, planting the seed so that they can engage later. So with that one, the students, we worked with them actually afterwards to publish the article. A group joined us and we did presentations at the Self-Study conference and published in our journal in Self-Study. With 5 of them, I think, ended up following on what did they learn from the experience and how did their projects go. So it was sort of like a scaled back version, but in a lot of ways the same way, like just support, challenge, encourage. When you see them ask a question, say why, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you follow that? But you have to really be aware, and coach a lot more. Like, they had qualitative methods courses. Like, I didn't have to teach them as much about interviewing, or there were a lot of skills they had that we didn't have to teach, but that you do have to teach with undergrads. But you don't scare them by saying, okay, we're now going to do grounded theory method of analysis. We just don't call it that. We just show them how to do it. And they are analyzing their own work and things like that. So yeah, it's sort of just like we don't scare them off with all the big names. I know that sounds awful, but that was how we did it.
I can extend on
And
that
you're
also.
starting to do
Talking about work being transformative. I left Kent State in 2016 and started teaching at Temple University in Philadelphia, and I teach a class, it's undergrad, and it's called Tweens and Teens. It's all about social, sexual development, how media interplays with cognitive development. It's a sociology, psychology, educational course, general ed course, and I changed, after our work, I've changed in putting them now together in collaborative groups, and they're actually doing research on campus in groups of 3 and 4. And getting to how do you do that with undergrads, I basically presented them with how to do a basic research study, how to look up methodologies. And it's not such a critical analysis and evaluation of their work as a research project, but actually figuring research out. I want the evidence that they are engaging in figuring research out. If I were to give them a template, do this, then this, then this, then I'm going to get multiple of the same exact projects, but they really do it small case, interviewing 10 people about a special topic we've studied in the course. For example, drug abuse. It could also be homelessness of students, and they really search out this population at a very basic level and interview them, do the research that we know of what happens to a student's grades or their social interactions when they are homeless. And I've had some amazing work with very little formal instruction in how to do research. And then they present a symposium the last 2 days of the course, much like a poster presentation, and they find that extremely valuable. And I've had students the next semester say, oh my gosh, I have to do a research project. Do you have the slides from, or do you have the sample? I have your feedback. I'm really interested in such and such. That's a very rewarding. I would never have done that if I didn't know the value of having a collaborative research group. I would have told everyone do a research project, like everyone has done for years. Well, not this group, but here's what you do it by yourself, do your own methods, without much guidance, and that's really throwing them to the fire, throwing them to the wolves. And I wanted my experience to be a positive push and how they actually approached it. So it's part of my requirement in the course now. Any other
It's
questions?
hard to see, so.
Yes. And no, we don't have microphones. All right, well, thank you so much again. Thank you to Soto.
Yes,
Thank you
and-
to Nancy and all the people we've spoken with. Really appreciate it.
And we're here to talk if you have questions, so we'll stay around for a little while. And hang
Thank you.
out. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Still don't know what I was waiting for.